First of all, welcome everyone. I see some familiar faces. I see some new faces. Let's open up that participants tab and the chat. I would love to hear where you're all from. Normally it's an international bunch that's here. And personally, I like these sessions. I like to attend these sessions also of other experts, just to chat and meet people in the chat. So like, if you know building a second brain, I've met many people here in the room as well through those open sessions. So let's see: Australia, Wisconsin, New York City, New York State, Germany, Munich. Great. Again, lots of Americans. But also Germans, Italians, British. Zundert. I've been there, although I live in Amsterdam. Great, so many faces. And again, you can unmute yourself if you want. So just interrupt me. Today's program, it's a salon. So I run a website called RoamStack, which is basically a knowledge base, a knowledge hub around tools for Roam research and workflows for Roam research, but the stack in the name is really to denote, well, we're not just talking about Roam research here, shiny features. We're also talking about workflows. How do you use it in combination with other tools, software tools? And like most of the content is aimed at professionals, so knowledge professionals. So if you're a knowledge worker, you sit in a lot of meetings, you write memos, proposals, again, if you believe you're a knowledge worker, you probably fit here. And if Roam is an important part of your workflow, but it's not the only part of your workflow, I think you're in the right spot right now. And again, it's a salon, which means I do a presentation on a topic, in this case, Zettelkasten, and it's basically to teach and to inspire. So a large part of these sessions is to inspire. So I cannot prescribe how you should work. Your workflows are personal. Your tool stack is personal. The only thing I can do is show you how I do things, how other people do things, people I learn from, and then dissect that and try to apply it to your own context. So these sessions are open also because I want you to ask questions if things are not clear, and I want you to share your own experiences with, in this case, Zettelkasten. I believe there are some people in here who are also in Roam Book Club, did Roam Book Club 4, which is basically the system that I use and the system I will show you today. So I call it Bohan style, but in reality, it's based on how to take smart notes. All right, so let's see in the chat. RBC 5, yeah, but Bo is not there, so like I don't know how much focus there is on building a Zettelkasten. Also, the book is a little bit different, but we'll dive into what a Zettelkasten is, even though you already know it. Maybe I will quickly go through it. If you are not familiar with Zettelkasten, please put it in the chat. I'm really curious to hear who has or does not have experience with it. Maybe if you already have one, also share it. Okay. Try to create twice, fill twice. Tim, I would love to hear what was like the breaking point.
Do you want me to speak?
Yeah, sure.
Please. Yeah, sure. Breaking point for me was just like consistency, because it's like once it's like any good habit. And then I was like, well, am I doing it the right way? As I'm building it, I get lost. I'm like, oh, the details. And then before I know it, like, I'm like, well, this is too complicated. And then it starts to fall away.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you touch on something very important, that it's not so much about the technology as it is about a practice, developing a practice. So for people not familiar with Roam Book Club, it's basically a I think it's a 6-week program, so 42 days, where you basically dissect the book and write about it in a collective Rome graph. So, and I've had many of these discussions also with Bo, because I believe you can learn Zettelkasten relatively quickly, but then the challenge is in making it a practice and doing it consistently. So that's also why I'm going to approach this a little bit from a, well, I have a little bit of a twist. So here, the bonus to space practice, that is, I think, how you can really bring your own notes in your face and to make it more of a practice. But we'll dive into that. Tim, thanks for sharing that, by the way. Let's see, other things in the chat. Well, I'll just get started and then we'll catch up with the chat in a bit. So what is a Zettelkasten? In its most basic form, it's a physical slip box, so an archive with index cards, and each index card contains one idea with a reference to like the origin of that idea. And it's used in academia extensively. It's not a very well-known system until Sönke Ahrens published his book, How to Take Smart Notes. I think it was 2017. A few Rome book clubs were about this book, and it was basically not so much about the ideas in the book themselves as it was about learning how to write in Rome, but the ideas still apply. The goal of a slipbox is to collect notes in an organized fashion that makes it easier to find your notes, to expand on your notes, and to reuse it in writing. So again, it's mostly used in academia to write. And maybe that's also why for some people it fails, because they don't have an incentive to collect notes to do research into a domain. They really need to have focus system to churn out specific things, like, I don't know, write client proposals, for example. So you can collect all these notes about client proposals or about a specific client, but then the question is, how do you utilize a Zettelkasten? So the Zettelkasten I'm going to show here is really mostly for learning and for writing. So if you have other needs, like project-based needs, that's not in the scope of this discussion. But if you do use Zettelkasten that way, I would love to talk with you. But it originated, again, in German academia. This guy, Niklas Luhmann, he used a system based on index cards, so the slipbox, the physical slipbox, with a reference system. So like every card had its unique ID, and that way he could very easily connect cards. So he could create collection cards where on one index card he would connect different index cards on different places in his slipbox. And that was how he created a web of knowledge, and that enabled him to really become prolific. So he was a sociologist. He had this big project he was working on for 30 years that he said, I want to create a theory of the entire society, which is pretty big. And that's how he came up with this note-taking system, which is very much bottoms up instead of top down, because he had no idea what he would be writing about. So he was reading papers, he was taking his notes, he was connecting ideas, insights from other academics, and that's how his own understanding came to be. But much of his thinking wasn't happening in his head. It was happening on paper, on the index cards. And that is something we try to emulate by building a Zettelkasten in Rome research. It's not so much to externalize what's already in your head, because thoughts tend to be fuzzy. But if you externalize your thoughts, then it becomes possible to manipulate them and to work with them. So if your ideas are captured in text, it becomes easier to work with it. But the process itself, actually just writing, is also a very useful thinking tool. So we'll get into that in a bit. So that is what a Zettelkasten is. Before we dive into why you should want to create one, let's see in the chat, quite busy. So many people seem to be familiar with it with Zettelkasten from a theoretical standpoint, but have not been able to solidify a practice. Let's see. So again, see people say consistency. Some say, well, I'm not very familiar with it, with Zettelkasten. Okay, let's see some other questions. If you have a question, just please start with the word question. So it's easier for me to find it back. Yes, you will get the replay as always. All right, let's get started with the why, and then dive into how to settle. And again, this is basically a review of how Bo does it, Bohan, and how I learned it from him. And we'll be diving into my personal permanent notes. I've created a little subset of my notes, and you'll see how I do it. So why create a Zettelkasten? So the first reason, I think this is the main one, it helps you to go from a note taker to a note maker. And this is a crucial point to make, is I think most of us don't have problems collecting notes, but making sense of them, wrestling with the ideas, that doesn't tend to happen. So if you're like me, large part of your Rome graph will be highlights. You import it probably via Readwise. You have thousands of blocks, and maybe you have the intention to ever revisit them, but you actually don't. So that is what a Zettelkasten provides an antidote to, but it has to be something that you do consistently. And I think once you understand, once you experience that wrestling with the ideas helps you to gain insights, I think that those experiences will drive you to do this more consistently. Like, I look forward to my writing sessions. I get all giddy. I'm like, oh, what will I discover today? And I think that is a healthy state of mind to be in. But obviously, you need to see the value in it. I think that's also why Bo has structured it as a 6-week daily writing course, because you need to experience what it means to get to those insights. Why else create a Zettelkasten? Like I said, it's a bottom-up approach. So instead of thinking beforehand what you're going to write about and then look for supporting evidence, which is quite easy, but it can also lead to flawed thinking because you're only going to look for evidence for your biases. This is a more bottom-up approach where you start to see patterns as you read more and you think out loud by writing. So as you interact with your notes, ideas start to emerge. You start to connect different ideas that otherwise would be unrelated, but because you are applying the knowledge that you take to your own personal context, instead of keeping it very generic, just saving a highlight. No, you're going to analyze that highlight on the page in Rome to wrestle with that idea. And that's how new ideas emerge. And another reason to use Zettelkasten is as a learning tool. Just revisiting your notes is already a form of spaced repetition, of spaced practice. And thinking about what notes you should connect to other notes, that in itself, like, you're trying to create connections in your head if you look at a note and you want to link it with another note. So that is also something that helps you to think through and to associate ideas by doing it externally, instead of trying to associate ideas all in your head, which is pretty difficult to do, I think. All right, so this is why you should want a Zettelkasten. I see someone mentioned note graveyard. Yes. Okay. The chat. Let's see. I see many people mention that they are note hoarders. So I think we all experience it. And I think it also has to do, this is just my opinion, I think it has to do with the ease of collecting highlights. So we have these apps like Instapaper or different browsers. It's so easy to just highlight something, connect it to a service like Readwise, and Readwise automatically dumps everything into your graph. Well, if you don't have a why or a process to then actually do something with it, it's not likely that you will do it. So I always say, don't feel bad if you realize you're a notes hoarder. It's just you haven't found your why yet. So something resonates in you that you save a highlight, but then what? If you take that extra step to really think through why something applies to you, I think that's when you will go from note taker to a note maker. Over time, it takes time. It needs to become a practice. Yeah, and Jason says, I feel like an archiver instead of a creator. Yes. So Zettelkasten will help you to actually become a creator, even though it's just in your own graph to start with. So there are roughly 4 phases when you write Zettels. So Zettel in German. I hope I don't know the exact meaning, but it means something like a note card. Like at Zettel, it's like the note card. So in our system, we talk about permanent notes, but we'll go through it. So the 4 phases are capture, meander, which I like to call writing pleading notes, distill, and connect. If you're familiar with other note-taking systems like building a second brain, like you will see some overlap between this. Although at Zettelkasten, in a sense it is a second brain, but it's much more active than the ideas that are presented in building a second brain. And I respect Thiago Itan, but his approach seems like it seems to be that it's quite easy to get into a passive consumption mode instead of an active creation mode with it. So that is hopefully something that the Zettelkasten will help you solve. Yeah, and I see Jason also mentioned progressive summarization. If you look at how I've structured these slides, this is essentially progressive summarization. So you take a snippet of text and then you bold the most important part of the sentence, which basically in building a second brain methodology is the most active part until you remix your notes. But when do you actually remix your notes? When you're going to write an article, for example, or when you're going to write a memo. But what happens in between? That is, for me, it's a little bit of a missing link. So progressive summarization, it's useful, but I think you really need to wrestle with the ideas yourself. So writing your own notes, I think, is the most important thing. So capture. This is also the capture phase in the building a second brain methodology. I think most people are familiar with it. Collecting highlights from basic any source, could be text, could be video, could be audio. But the 4 criteria, I think you should ask yourself or keep yourself to. And again, this is from building a second brain. Anything that's inspiring for you, anything that's useful for you, anything that's surprising, or anything that's personal or hard-won knowledge, something that you don't encounter as easily. Those are the things you should save in general. So the best filter you have is anything that resonates with you. Although I think, for example, the surprising or the personal, those tend to be more unique notes. So it's also very easy. And I've noticed myself as well that I sometimes tend to highlight the same ideas over and over again. So then I have like dozens of highlights all about the same idea, and it's not really necessary, I believe. So that is also something that a Zettelkasten will help against as you go through your highlights and you write down your takeaways from those highlights. At some point you have enough takeaways from one idea, even if you see it in different contexts. So it will help you to be more critical of what you actually save, because you're actually going to work with those highlights. They are not just sitting in your graph. that you will do something with it. So it causes some friction to actually save something and not do anything with it. So that is the capture phase. Then the meander. So meander, in my view, those are the fleeting notes. And fleeting notes are basically anything that comes up to you when you read a snippet of text or you hear something in an interview, and you write down the original source, you maybe have a highlight, and then just free write. So for me, I really see it as a sense-making technique, because as you basically think out loud by writing just whatever comes up to you, that in itself will bring your thinking forward. And it's also very easy to get trapped in a cycle of thinking, to think the same thing over and over again. But when you see it in front of you, when you see that you've written down and you're thinking in circles, then that becomes obvious when you write it down. So it's really a free thinking exercise. And it's also, again, a filter, because if you highlight something, but you cannot explain to yourself why it resonates with you, is it really worth saving, you know? So that is a question to ask yourself. And I actually have a rule for myself that anytime I highlight something in Instapaper or Hypothesis, any tool I use, I have to write a note. So that's also, it helps me to make a decision on what tools to use. I can only use highlighting tools that allow me to add notes, because that is actually already where my fleeting notes start. And I just give myself a little hook to think about in the future, because fleeting notes, I will return to those fleeting notes to further flesh them out and to then draw my conclusions of why this idea I've highlighted is relevant to my own life, to my own context. Does that make sense when I say it like this, that it's like an extra filter, that it also helps you to prevent becoming a notes hoarder? See, thumbs up, great. Let's see, let's Nick, love Tiago's ideas. Hate his progressive summarization concept. Yeah, I love it. Well, I love progressive summarization, but you need to know the place for it. So, Nikki, good question. Is progressive summarization like fleeting notes? The answer is no, and I will show you the main difference. So let's show you one example. So, for example, here I have my fleeting notes. So I took a highlight from our good friend Nick Milo, who is a Obsidian expert, but he has really good ideas about knowledge management in general. So I took this highlight. I could, if I would to progressively summarize this snippet, I would bold the main part. So let me progressively summarize this snippet, and then I will show you how it's different from fleeting notes. So this is just the text that I saved. So it's about mental squeeze points. So that is a key concept. I could even link it, but I'm not going to do it at this point because I do linking in a different way. Let's see. So mental squeeze point is when your inserted knowledge becomes so messy it overwhelms you. So overwhelms and discourages you. So that's a mental squeeze point. Either you're equipped with frameworks to overcome the squeeze point, or you're discouraged and possibly abandon your project. This is usually followed by yet another search for the next app that will make all the difference. Don't we all have that? I think so. This is all right. So if I click away, you can see. So this is a highlight I've now progressively summarized. What does it mean? If I'm scanning my notes, if I'm scanning my highlights, I don't want to read the entire highlight again. I don't want to have to ask myself, what is the key point here in this highlight? So that's why I bold the key parts. And I can basically just get the gist of this highlight, but only reading the bolded parts. So in this case, I would read a mental squeeze point, overwhelms and discourages, and followed by yet another search. So I get a better sense of what a mental squeeze point is. If I want to dive deeper into this, I can read the non-bolded parts. But now the question is, I've highlighted or I've bolded these parts. What does it actually mean for me? What does it mean for me in my context? I know what this mental squeeze point is because I've experienced it before, but why is this important to know? Why is this idea important? So that's why I go into my fleeting notes. And let me just open it in the main screen. And as you can see, I do a lot of writing just to make sense of this one highlight. And this is me writing for myself. And I basically just reason with myself based on past experiences, anything that is triggered by that one highlight, that one idea of the mental squeeze point, I'm writing down. So I tend to write in the you form. That's not because I write for other people, but I try to encourage myself. So I'm basically giving myself a lecture. So this is me talking to myself. So when I read these back, I really read it as a lesson. So these are all lessons for myself. These are all insights I had in this moment. So this is just me making sense of this concept, mental squeeze point. And here again, I'm just talking with myself. So here it's like, yeah, I start to see the value of maps of content. So I arrived at this mental squeeze point concept through the idea of maps of content. And maps of content is basically index pages in your note-taking system, like the collection note cards that Niklas Luhmann had to point to different areas in his physical slip box. And I was very skeptical of that. I was like, you don't need that. And then I started to read a little bit, and now I'm making sense. And I'm actually, through reasoning with myself, I'm coming to the realization, this maps of content idea, it's not really that bad of an idea. And why not? Well, it gives a space I can navigate and store in my memory. On the other hand, I also see the potential danger of using maps of content, as I see how it limits serendipitous encounters with saved information. And then I ask myself, what if the maps could change without this adding friction? So I'm like asking myself almost like a research question to dive deeper into. And if I want, I can turn this into a to-do for myself to dig deeper into. So that is how the meandering phase should go in my view. Let's have a look at the chat. Trent says, I think that going from fleeting to literature notes is one layer of summarization. Then from literature to permanent notes is another layer of summarization. I think that's a good summary. Although in my case, the meandering is really free writing, whereas the literature notes, and that is the distill phase, it's the essence of the highlight in your own words. So whereas in your fleeting notes, you can link it to anything, any other idea, you just go crazy. You just keep writing until you're done, like chiseling away at your understanding of that idea. And the literature notes, once you've done that, once you've really made sense of the idea, then you summarize the highlights in your own words. So instead of going wide, so fleeting notes is really going wide. It's divergent thinking. And to then bring back your focus to, okay, but what triggered this again? You go back to your highlights that you took, and then you summarize the highlight in your own words. So you have like a little package of that idea, but if you write it in your own words, you tend to remember them better. So using other people's language, it's not your own language. It's not how you would say things. So you're less likely to actually remember it. And I think it's also probably why we like to hang out with people who are like us, because what other people tell us, that then tends to resonate with us. So how people use language. So it's I think language, how you phrase things is super important for understanding. It's like the main tool you have. Does it make sense? So fleeting notes, write about anything, literature notes, get back to the essence of the highlight, but then in your own words. And let me show how that looks in this one. So again, we have the one about the mental squeeze point. And I have all these fleeting notes, like insane. And like, as you can see, maybe you've noticed, I form paragraphs by indenting thoughts that follow after another thought. So the way I approach my Zettelkasten in a block-based system like Rome, so bullet-based system, is that I have one thought per block. So that is really, it's like it becomes really atomic, your ideas. And the beauty of this is because I have one sentence, one idea per block, I can very easily remix these later. I can just fire off a block search and then look for key terms I'm looking for. And often I will find just thoughts, realizations I had that way that I will then use in outlines for articles that I write. Or when I give a training, I had some insights about specific ideas, for example, and then I can basically just grab a block, turn it into an outline. So that is why I do it like this. And then the indentation is, well, if I click into one of these blocks, as you can see here, I have the entire context. So I clicked on this block, it opens up, but I can see what thinking comes before. So I have it's like an audit trail. How did I get to a specific idea? And then once I think I've wrangled enough with that train of thought, I will go back to the roots and I will start another thought that I have that is maybe not directly related to what I was writing about. So I start a new string of blocks, basically. And then the literature notes are written in a similar way, but it's just one paragraph where I rephrase basically what's in here. In the end, this is longer, but again, these are all distilled thoughts I had based on guiding my thinking first, getting everything out. All right. So that is the still phase. Let's see if there are quite many messages in the chat. Question from Eric. What strategies do you use to see the patterns of similar highlights proactively? We'll get to that in a bit, because that is basically the connect phase once you've written your permanent notes. Other questions? Nick, are you going to be in the next linking your thinking cohort? I'm thinking of joining up. Actually, no, I don't have time to do another course. Unfortunately, I'm working on my own courses. Could be interesting, but I focus completely on Rome for like 90% of my knowledge work. Of like only the last 10% of doing the final draft that I tend to do in Google Docs or sometimes in Obsidian, but I don't use Obsidian. And even though that Milo says, yeah, you can apply this to Rome, I think learning ideas and then trying to apply them to another system that without knowing the ideas yet, I think that's very difficult. So for example, if you're going to do building a second brain and you use Rome, maybe you should switch temporarily to Evernote, because Thiago uses Evernote for all his examples. So you can first understand the ideas before trying to port them over to another tool. And that's actually what I did when I did building a second brain for the first time. I did it 4 times, actually, 1 time as a mentor. But the first time I tried to apply it to, I was still using Notion back then. And I couldn't apply his ideas to Notion because I was trying to translate ideas that he showed using Evernote to Notion, which wasn't working. So be careful with tool agnostic courses, although I believe in them. they tend to be less specific. And if you're going to do courses where other tools are used, really ask the course creator how confident they are that they're like in the simplicity of their ideas, that they can easily port them over to other tools. All right, Leonardo, question, capture step. What's the importance of context when capturing notes or quotes? I mean, I could misunderstand the passage at this time, but researching more, I could understand it in a clearer, deeper way. Is it possible to avoid or minimize this danger? There are a few ways. First of all, if you use a tool like Readwise, there are these action tags, so you can actually create your own highlights. So you can cut out the irrelevant stuff, and you can, even across different paragraphs, you can select phrases and glue them together almost. And there's an article about this in the Rome knowledge base. So let me grab it. And then for the context, I will show you. Well, first let me grab the article. How to make smart highlights for Readwise. And this is basically where I show Readwise's tagging system. So you can add some structure to your notes. You can concatenate parts. So as you can see here, I can grab this phrase and then I can glue that together with this phrase. So I'm just going to share this in the chat. So that's for you, Leonardo, your question. And then also, how do I get more context? Well, with my reference note, I have the link to the original context. So I can always go back and have the complete context right here. So that is how I approach it. So I have the highlight, and then I have where it comes from with the link to it. Okay. More questions. Eric, do you keep a manifesto or a list of rules of thumb for your practices as a reminder, like the rule that you need to make a note for every highlight? That's a good one. I should do that. Yeah, it's basically all mental models through a lot of trial and error, after a lot of pain, wasted effort, losing notes, not doing anything with my notes, wasting enormous amounts of time, that I discovered like my set of rules for myself. But I think it's good for a manifesto. That's a good idea. Question from Trent. Does the meandering phase change if we're taking notes on a subject we don't know well and therefore don't have many ideas about? I don't think it changes, because it's you trying to explain to yourself why this idea resonates with you. So even if you cannot put your finger on it yet, why something resonates with you, because you don't really have enough knowledge yet, by trying to discover on the page why something resonates with you, maybe you can say, well, this reminds me of this idea, this reminds me of this experience that I had. And then as you think about it, you start to make sense of it. And I like to write in question and answer format. So I ask myself a question. So why is it that I never revisit my notes? I ask myself, and then in the string of blocks underneath, I try to make sense of all these times I've collected notes, but then didn't do anything with it. So that is basically how I then make sense of it. I guide my thinking about maybe other things that I already know more about and that it reminds me of. So I can then associate that new knowledge with something I already know. And that is basically learning. Learning means associating new ideas to ideas you already know, or yeah, to knowledge you already have. Other questions? Andrew, so is the idea that you use fleeting notes to think through things before you create the literature notes, or fleeting and literature notes, two separate things? Yes, very good question. So there is a sequence of doing things. So going to the process, this is basically the chronological process. You start by capturing something and you just store it away. In my personal graph, and I will show this in a bit, in my personal graph, I have an inbox where I basically collect highlights, and then I have a few fleeting notes, but like that's to put a pin in it when I have time to then dive deeper into writing fleeting notes. And then maybe after I've written the fleeting notes, maybe I put it away for a few days, and then I return to it. I see, oh, I've already written my fleeting notes. I reread them, maybe I expand a little bit, and then I write the literature notes. So then I distill basically what I've read. So yes, there is a clear process, and it can spend days, can spend weeks writing on one permanent note. And then now we get to like the juicy part, why it's called a slip box, because all that other stuff, it's just a tool to help your thinking, to help your understanding, to make sense of it, and to connect it to your own context. But then the question comes, but how do I actually use them? So nowadays we have technical tools. Like I said, I use block search extensively to build my outlines. So I don't even visit pages anymore. I just am writing my outlines by using the double parentheses and searching for keywords. So that is how I mostly distill stuff. But you will want to have like some structure, because if you don't have any structure you can lean on, then it becomes very difficult to actually revisit those notes. So this entire process only helps if you then actually do something with those notes. So like I said, you can write outlines with it, but you will want to expand on your knowledge and really create webs of knowledge. So if I go to the permanent notes page, I have these notes. So these are all statements. These are all statements that I like, conclusions I reached after writing my fleeting notes, after writing the literature notes. And like the pièce de résistance is, I now have this one takeaway that I can distill in one statement. So this is like the end goal of doing all that work. So if I go into if I go into that permanent note, like I have everything here, but the final statement, my final insight after wrestling with this highlight is, having systems for knowledge work is more important than the tools you use for those systems. So that is the takeaway I had from this highlight. As you can see, you may think, that's not what that highlight says, man. That doesn't matter. It's what is relevant for me. It's my takeaway. And why is that my takeaway? Because I've wrestled with the idea, and I'm more interested in my insights than in distilling what someone else has to say. Like, it helps me to trigger my insights. It nudges me to think in different ways. But then at the end of the day, I do believe that my insights count. And I think many of us, we tend to overestimate the value of other people's insights over our own insights. But if you're doing the work, if you're spending 45 minutes writing all this stuff only to end up with this one statement, that's valuable. And I think we should give ourselves a little bit more credit that if we do this work, that our insights also count. So so this is like the up until the distillation phase, and now comes the connection phase. So I have turned this into a link, so I can revisit this statement. I can link to it. I can, when I'm writing other notes, I can link to it. So it's easy to find. But as you can see here, I've also tagged it with systems. So this is like a concept, a very broad concept. But this is, again, an entry point, because I can visit the systems page, and then I will find several notes, several highlights, maybe, about systems. So that is, as I'm roaming my database, I see those different contexts. So I go to the systems page, then I find this, I drill a little bit deeper. So that is one level of connection, just tagging it with high-level concepts. But as you can see here, apart from these high-level concepts, I also have like related permanent nodes nested underneath. What does that mean? That means if I go to the productivity page, that will also be linked to hashtag systems. So now I get like the combination productivity systems. I can go to productivity and I will see this node. I was like, hey, okay. So I encounter this node, but I can see my line of thinking, how I reached this statement, because before I write a permanent node, I think also about where will I put it in the structure? To what other ideas is it related? So that is basically how you start to build little webs of knowledge. So if I go to hashtag productivity to the productivity page, I will also encounter a note about structure. I will encounter this note about systems. So can you see how this in itself is also spaced repetition? Because even if I go to productivity, I will be confronted with these notes and I can click through, and that's basically how you roam your database. You go from node to node and you read, and then at some point you think, I have another insight, and then maybe you write a new fleeting note, or maybe you get an idea for an article or for a memo or whatever. All right, so that is the connection phase, and this tends to trip up people. I think if you have trouble understanding this, I think it's worth diving a little bit deeper into how does Roam actually work on as an outliner. So how are blocks associated? So you can link to blocks directly. You can link to pages, but you can also associate them by nesting them underneath. So if you find this difficult to grasp, also, again, look in the Roam knowledge base. And there's this little article about indentation for association. This is a very simple, basic introductory course. And this is where I discuss the logic of indentation. And I also have this video linked, very useful if you want to dive a little bit deeper. Okay, let's go to the chat. Ooh, many questions. Okay. All right, okay, let's go to the question. Tyler, good question. I'm a new Roam Stack member, about a week. Welcome, great. Are there resources, courses, or materials on the topic of Zettelkasten for members to go deeper? Not yet. I'm working on a self-paced course. So it's basically Roam Book Club style Zettelkasten as a self-paced course with workshops. I'm still building it. So this is actually one of the first sessions I'm doing to also clarify my own thinking. So as you can see, I'm making sense of the ideas also based on your feedback. So this is part of my process, but good question. It's in the making. All right. I see many questions about the little, how do you say it? This little sign, the more than, how do you say it? I don't know. Bracket? No, it's not a bracket.
Greater than.
Greater than symbol. Thank you. So what this does, it's markdown. It's markdown. So that turns it into a block quote. So it just gives it a little bit of a different CSS, so a little bit of a different look. I use this to differentiate between what is my writing. So basically anything that I write, I just regard as my thoughts, and anything that are not my thoughts, I just add a greater than symbol. I put these between brackets, so it becomes a link, and as it's a link, I can actually filter on the highlights. So so this is basically just a symbol for me to say this is a highlight, and I can then filter in search results. I can filter on all the highlights, or can filter them out, so I only see my own thinking. And when I use it, it's actually only when it's not my own words. So when I take a highlight from somewhere. If you actually look in the knowledge base under the readwise articles, so setting up readwise for Rome, you'll see that in my metadata template, when I export a highlight, readwise will automatically put this in front. So I don't even need to do it personally anymore. For things that I add directly to my graph, I have a little, oh crap, I don't have it set up here. Anyway, not important what I was going to show you. Let's see, let's go back to the chat. Nikki, you said this is a point, permanent node structure is where I got lost in RBC4. I don't know what I just said later just now. I don't know if that made more sense, or if it's still confusing for you. I would love to hear a little bit more why it's confusing for you.
I think it was the because you had to write Bo made us write the permanent note after doing the work around that piece of information, but then you had to put it into the Zettelkasten before you wrote the note, and then you had to do the thumbnail, and then you had to link all the relevant notes. And I think in all of those, my brain just went to jelly, and the mechanics of what you did when, I lost it.
Yeah, I completely understand. Let's see how I can explain this best. So how I do it, I have a page called inbox where I will use you know what, I'm just going to show it. I think that's clear. Let me open up my personal graph, which will take a few seconds to load. So I will go back to the chat. Jason, question, do you use the context words tags in more than one higher level concept? Yeah, like I could create a new branch with somewhere systems on top. Yeah, I can use it in more than one context. And I will show you another way, which I actually skipped over, is another way how you can associate. So you should be able to see my screen now. So this, like another way how I link notes is by, hopefully this is not confusing, but you can see this little one. So this is a reference. So I've referenced this block somewhere else. How have I done that? So I click it to see the context. So what I've done is I have linked this permanent node to this node about structure. As you can see here, I have actually linked several nodes. So this is the original permanent node that I wrote. So, and then I've linked this permanent node to it and this one about awareness. Why do I do that? It's because these are in different, how do you say that? These are in different branches. So they're not associated yet. That's how I link them. As you can see here. So this one, awareness, I have it from here. Focus is from here. So this is how I can still link them, even though they're different branches. Again, this is, if you understand the indentation part, that is crucial here. what it looks like in my own page is I have my inbox, which getting filled up quite a bit. Normally it shouldn't be this crowded, but I start with my template. So when do I fire this off is when I see a snippet of text or I hear something that resonates with me. Can be as I'm reading something and I'm already in front of my computer, I will probably go into my inbox page, fire up this template, and then just put the highlight from the original source, just copy paste it, put the link here to the original source, and then I just go to town. I just write fleeting notes. So I just go crazy. Then at some point I will think, well, I've written enough for now about this. So at some point I will return, as you can see here, sometimes a little bit more extensive. And then why have I captured so much here? Because it's the basic idea is standard operating procedures, but I wanted to capture the entire context. So it doesn't have to be one little snippet. If you need more text, do it. As you can see here, I have divided them up in individual snippets. Why is that? So it becomes easier to reuse them. So I want even my highlights to be atomic so that they only contain one idea per bullet. And then I make sense of it. So I write them. I write these fleeting notes. And as you can see here, I've tagged it with, I need to return to this. So I use the GTD. So here, Amazon seems to be famous for the principles around writing effective memos. I should dive into this. #someday. So this is actually this is how I connect a fleeting thought to another process. So this is really another way that you can make sure that you revisit your notes. You really need to have processes or systems that hook into your note-taking process. Otherwise, it's less likely that you will actually revisit them. I haven't written the literature notes yet. I will do that later. And I just said, when I have an hour, I just go into my inbox and I just write. I just see whatever triggers me. And so that means I have several filters. It's not just collecting the highlight. It's also seeing how much can I write about it, what other tangents I go off into. And they grow over time, these permanent notes. And then, like you asked, Nikki, once everything is done, I open my permanent notes page and I think, and I've written my permanent note and I just think, okay, where does this fit best? And what other notes are relevant, but are not in the same branch? Well, let's add them as block references here. So I can still connect notes. I can connect this what would you call it? This little web of notes to this web of notes. So this branch is one web of notes. This branch is one web of notes. But then because I referenced another node, I've actually now connected two webs of notes. So that's how you create webs of knowledge. I hope that makes sense. And I do realize this is something that many people find confusing. I found it very confusing in the beginning as well.
That's helpful, thank you. And I could see did you have the greater than symbol in your in your permanent notes or the literature notes? You had it in the literature notes already set up as part of your template?
Yes.
That's helpful. And I think I'd missed the branches. I think I missed the point of tagging things or indenting things was actually branches. So I think I had put the things from the same branch in, and then I was getting little loops.
Exactly. Yeah.
So now you've explained they're separate branches. That makes a whole load more sense.
Exactly. So by creating the branches, you create one web, and then by linking to different other branches, that's how you interlink the webs. Amazing. And why I really like Roam for this is because, as you can see with the inline references, it's just so easy to click to other ideas and to really go, to see ideas in connection that otherwise you wouldn't see connected as easily. So for example, I have notes here about meditation, about awareness, and then productivity systems. Normally you wouldn't, well, I think nowadays more people do it, but like normally you wouldn't think, oh, meditation, being productive. But there could be overlap, using mindfulness to become calmer, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, let's go back to the chat. It's really active. I love it.
Chuck's got his hand up.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, no worries. I just want to jump in with a kind of a related question. Thank you, Rams. This is kind of like really interesting to sort of see exactly how you pull this together. So I saw in some of your fleeting notes were sort of permanent notes that were kind of coming up. You were referencing like a medley newsletter, which obviously has 5 different things in it. Would you create one permanent note for that whole newsletter with just sort of like the main idea you're taking away, or would you end up creating like 5 different permanent notes for that thing?
I would create 5 different permanent notes.
Okay.
So each permanent note is triggered by one idea. And even if I have 10 highlights from one article that resonate with me, that means that I will have 5 permanent notes from that one article. Because really the goal is it not to organize by source, but it's to organize by context and to make it as atomic as possible. So if you have one idea, it becomes easier to connect 2 ideas than to connect one collection of 4 ideas with another collection of like 3 ideas. Like, where's the overlap? It becomes very difficult. You need to keep a lot of information in your head. Whereas if you only have one idea and you connect it to another idea, that is manageable, I believe.
Cool, thanks. Hey, one other thing too, I saw on the capture page, like using the bow system, you end up having all these like stub permanent notes without any reference to like what they are, and you always have to like dig into to kind of get the context. Do you like that, or do you have a solution? I saw you put some tags on some of those.
Yeah. So you mean my inbox page, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Let me show you. So yeah. So like this way, there's not a lot of context. So yeah, that is absolutely a thing. I do it because I get overwhelmed very easily. So what I mostly do is I open this one. Well, this one, there's nothing. I open this one. And the first thing I do is what is there already? So I can see there's already the highlight and there's the fleeting notes. And then I often start out just by this and I see like, no, I don't want to work on this. Okay, close. Next one. Let's see. Personal leverage. Ooh, sounds interesting. Let's see. Okay. And then I was like, okay, I will pick one and then I will continue. So that is basically how I do it. And I just choose again with whatever resonates with me. But again, this is also one of the reasons I do atomic notes, because maybe I want to dig a little bit deeper into journaling, for example, or learning how to learn. If I have an article that talks about learning and space repetition and all these different concepts, like maybe I don't want to write about software. I just want to talk about how we process information. So I can become very specific in what I write about by having just one idea per note. Sorry, very
awesome.
wordy answer.
Thank you.
I see another hand raised. Jason.
Thanks, mate. To follow up on something that Chuck asked there before that you answered, you were saying that if you had 5 ideas in your fleeting notes, or you would then make 5 permanent notes. Now, back in your inbox that you're showing there, and as you're writing your permanent notes, in that template, would you put the multiple permanent notes all in the same one, or would you grab out the different ideas, the 5 different ideas, and make 5 whole like templates with that in it?
Good question. I have actually an example of where I have 2 permanent notes, or 2 like seedlings of permanent notes from the same article. So this is the same article, but they are two different highlights. So these are, yeah, two highlights I took from the same article, pretty lengthy. Well, this article is not very long, but was good. I think I already took two other permanent notes from it. So same article, maybe related ideas, because it's still about personal leverage, but this is like a definition of personal leverage, and this is like the components of the personal leverage. So to me, those are two different ideas, basically. I can still connect these. So at some point, I will write a permanent note. I will have a statement, and then I don't know. Let's statement after insight, and then how will I connect those? Well, I will just make a block reference copy, and then that's right here. So that is how I can still connect the two different but overlapping ideas, even if they are from the same article. Why do I separate them? It's not about the source so much. It's about the idea. So I really want to focus on the idea. I started out with creating all my notes on the same page if it was like all my notes were triggered by the same article, but that's not the context I want to see them in. I want to use these ideas regardless of where they come from. So that's why I pull them apart.
Yeah, that has really clarified that for me, because I tried to do the same sort of thing, a lot of ideas about Cal Newport's deep work book. And I was putting it all on the one page, and it just became a total mess, and I couldn't get any clarity from my individual thought. But yeah, that really helps me understand that. Thanks.
Yeah. And as Sönke Ahrens says in the book, How to Take Smart Notes, you need to ask yourself when you write a permanent note, in what context do I want to re-encounter this? So you're not likely to revisit ideas based on a source. You're not probably going again through all of your notes of one source, because like probably 80 or 90% will be noise, because it's not talking about the ideas that you're looking for. So why not do it differently? Why not create branches of ideas like this? And then anytime you find an interesting note, you see other notes that are in the same context. So I think that is way more powerful, seeing your notes in that atomic context, seeing them linked to other ideas related, whereas a book can present like different ideas that as a whole maybe have a system, but you cannot load that all in your brain. It's better to see them in context.
Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
Can I hop in?
Yeah, Andrew. I was just reading your question, but go ahead.
Yeah, so I figured since it was related to everything that we were just chatting about, I would just describe the nuances. So if you have a single highlight and you're writing a bunch of fleeting notes about it, you've even summarized that highlight with your literature note, but like within that fleeting notes, like you've come out with multiple insights that you would want to theoretically create multiple permanent notes out of, especially if you're thinking about it in the linking structure of like, oh, these are like different ideas that I've come up with from, inspired by this single highlight. Or even if you're starting a fleeting note, not based on a highlight, but maybe you were out for a walk and you had an idea about something and you want to, just write about that idea that you just had, and that could lead to multiple permanent notes. Like, how does that work with that structure? Because I know that everything seems to be nested under the idea of like all of this work leads to a single permanent note.
Yeah, good question. So I actually haven't thought about it that much. I actually have started permanent notes just because I had some kind of insight where I didn't know where it came from, and then like reference myself. How you would do that? Yeah, I would like to talk with Bo about this. I don't have a clear answer. What I can imagine is that you would reference, the block that gave you that idea to actually start a new permanent node, to branch it off. And in your reference nodes, you would just place that fleeting node, that block that triggered your idea, and then you create a new branch almost. So let me actually demo it. So I think that would be a little bit clearer. So let's say I'm writing here. I'm like, you will always be a bottleneck in your productivity. And somehow this is a gigantic epiphany for me. And I'm like, oh, I have like 1,000 other insights based on this. What you could do is, well, you're just going to reference this, remove this, and then you start to riff off this that way. So that's actually then how you create fleeting nodes to another permanent node. I haven't done this myself, so I don't know. Well, like I said, maybe once or twice, but that was often based on like a journal entry, not on another fleeting node. So I don't know. I don't know what other people do, if this adds any I don't think this would break the system at all. So you actually could do it this way. Yeah, so this is how I do. But again, I haven't tried it myself, so I'm always very cautious to recommend things that I haven't really tested myself. But this is one approach.
Cool.
Okay, let's go back to the chat. And I still realize I still need to show you the space repetition part, but I first want to go through the question. And Jason asked, do you have multiple permanent nodes that use the same context words? I don't have yet, but my Zettelkasten is limited so far. But yes, that is absolutely acceptable. Question by Chris. Do you have an example of where you've linked to a permanent node from another block that isn't the child of that permanent node? I don't tend to link to entire permanent nodes unless it's like, oh, this reminds me of, and then I quickly hit the double brackets and I think of the statement and I write it down so to link it. But it's more like when I revisit that train of thought and I say, well, this reminds me of, I can then click through the other context. How I normally use all the writing that I do in my fleeting notes and my literature notes is, like I said, I build outlines based on just blocks, and I will show that how I do it in the case of Rome stack. So this is my Rome stack page. And then let's see, for example, here, this is how I create my outlines. So I basically just look for blocks. So in this case, I ask myself a question: why make journaling effortless? I ask myself, what are the keywords here? Effortless and journaling, and maybe effortless journaling. So I would start by maybe effortless. And this looks through my entire graph, this block search. So I don't care where it comes from. I just read through these blocks. And if something resonates with me, and as you can see here, these are all my own writings. And then I see suddenly this marked up block, and I'm like, what? Oh, wait, those are not my words. This is a highlight. So that is why I do it. And as you can see, if I hover over it, you can see maybe it's a little bit small, but you can see the small greater than sign. And this, I think this is probably a fleeting note if I just read it. But this is how I build my outlines. So I don't really, sometimes I go into my permanent notes and I just roam around. Often with building an outline, I like to do it like this, just block search. and that is sufficient for me. And then it doesn't matter where I wrote it. Lisa, shut up, take our money, Ramses. Thank you. I see a lot about the greater sign thing. What's the issue? So basically what it does, it's a block quote, and it's just a way to indicate this is an outside source. I didn't write this. So that's basically it. By wrapping it out between brackets, I can filter on highlights basically, or filter them out. Any chance you have a diagram? You mean of the workflow, Tim? Is that what you mean? Yeah. When I will create the course, I will make sure to also add like visuals, like diagrams of like the process steps. Check whichever link something that isn't in your permanent notes in relevant notes. For example, if you came across another article that is related, or maybe a quote that is in your graph, I wouldn't add them underneath the relevant notes. What I've shown, what I would do is in my fleeting notes, I will link to other pieces of content that it reminds me of. So, oh, this reminds me of this book, and then I just link to the book. So that's mostly what I do in my fleeting notes. I know there are different opinions about it, that you should don't only link what's in your Zettelkasten. Personally, I don't believe in that, but I wouldn't make it. I would keep it subtle and very much in context. So don't go create lists and lists of relevant content, because again, then if you connect very broad ideas or broad concepts to each other, it becomes difficult to see why you connect those things. So be careful, link it to other ideas. Okay, let's switch again to the presentation, because I still need to dive into, and we only have 10 minutes left, and there should have had time for Q&A, but there were many questions already. So that's all nice and all, but how can you make it really easy to bring it in your face? So as you get insights, as you discover concepts, maybe you'll want to turn things into a flashcard. You want to revisit those. So first principle, not everything deserves to be committed to memory. It's more like, oh, this is an amazing insight, and I want to return to it, or I want to return to it more often, because maybe it's such a complex idea that you cannot figure it out all in once. So then, if you at that point you think, well, I want to actually now learn from my notes instead of just storing them, I want to bring them from my second brain to my first brain. Again, you need to be selective. Spaced repetition is very powerful. So what is spaced repetition? It's using an algorithm to revisit your notes. So if you're familiar with Anki, or even with paper flashcards, you have a front and you have a back, and you basically will test yourself. So you will get to see the front of a flashcard, and then you test yourself on the answer. So I will quickly show you how to do this. There are 3 ways that I know of. First of all, there's a browser extension called Roam Toolkit. This works only in Chrome and Firefox. Well, Chrome meaning Brave, Vivaldi, any Chromium browser. So that works really well. Also works just to give yourself a reminder, say, I want to see this again in 2 days. And it will basically pop up in your linked references. A little bit more of a sophisticated solution is Roam SR. This is a plugin, works completely within Roam. So it means that then on any device, you have access to Roam. Roam SR works. That means that also your flashcards are always available. You can do them everywhere. I've written a how-to about it. And we'll demo in a bit how to install it and then to actually turn a note into a flashcard. And then there's Neurocache, which works with also like Obsidian and Bear and general Markdown notes. For this, you would need to export your notes and then import them. So it's not really as seamless. So let's quickly demo this Roam SR because I think it's friggin' powerful. So let's see, go to the Roam SR page. Let's see, just, okay, pretty straightforward. Yeah, okay. So just need the code. And Roam SR is basically Anki in Roam. So very powerful. I think I will just create a page /Roam/SR. On the script. Yes, I know what I'm doing. Okay, so now as you can see, I've enabled this plugin. Now you get this review button at in your left sidebar. So you can see there are no flashcards yet. How do you create a flashcard? Well, let's go to the permanent notes. Oh. And let's say I don't know. I got some insights here. And I want to, let's see. Are there any questions I ask myself here? I'll just pick something. Normally, what I would do is only a question, like a parent block that contains a question that I would turn into a flashcard. But just for sake of demonstration, I would just turn one into a flashcard. So how do you create a flashcard for Roam SR? The only thing you need to do is add #SR, and that's it. So now, let's see if it refreshes. Well, now it's refreshing. So I click review, and then, hey, it's not showing anything. That's strange. That is strange. Well, that is a great demo. Let me refresh. Maybe it hasn't loaded everything. It's also a great demo of the speed of Roam, quote unquote. Okay, review. Let's see if it's working. I have, yeah, okay. So what I see here is I see the front of the card. The front of the card is the block that contains the #SR. The way space repetition works is you think for yourself, what is the answer to this question? And when you click show answer, you see the rest of the context. So basically you see the child blocks. Again, this is the power of using an outliner, because I can basically write my notes in question and answer format, add a as R, and then I can just test myself. And then I can tune the algorithm by saying, well, I didn't know the answer. I need to review it again. So you will see it again within 10 minutes or within the same review. And I knew the answer. I click good, and then it will be planned for the next day. As you revisit these cards, you get like the time skill changes. So like when I was learning Spanish, at one point I had cards like the next review would be 6 years later. So the algorithm had determined that I wouldn't forget that that flashcard because I had seen it so many times progressively over time that I wouldn't forget it for the next 6 years. It would be highly unlikely. So that is basically revisiting notes, making the best use of your time. So you're not actually revisiting notes that are probably already still fresh in your memory. And this is how you can get it working. All right, that's it. That's everything I wanted to show. It was a lot. And I think we're right on time. Yes, cool. I had planned 90 minutes for this. I don't know if there are any questions. Were many questions throughout? If you want, you can just unmute yourself. All right. I know it was a long session. Thank you for sticking with me.
I was going to say thank you, and thank you for diving into those specific questions you had in such detail. That was really helpful. Thank you.
Great. You're welcome. You're welcome. This is well, for me, this is also a learning tool because I give an explanation, you ask follow-up questions, and that's how I learn. So I use these sessions as a feedback tool.
Great, thank you. This is really helpful.
Great.
Sorry, just a little question. Can I?
Sorry?
Just a little question. Like, do you have a dedicated session for creating an outline, or is it just something that more organic, that like while you're making notes, you just, oh, this is related to what you are trying to write? Or is it just you made some special plan, like some time of the day to go over your note or something?
So this is basically to feed my writing system. So this is one part of my overall process. This hooks into what you say, like an outlining process. I have recorded a session about the code framework. So the code framework is a system developed by Tiago Forte, and it stands for capture, organize, distill, and express. So it's basically to go from notes that you capture to expressing them in a variety of ways. Zettelkasten is one way to actually feed that code system. Let me link to that recording. So if you are a member, I have a complete page in the knowledge base, but I will share the video as well if you're not a member, so you can still benefit. All right. Have a look at that. I think that could be useful. The other part I've just shown by turning them into flashcards, that's basically to turn your notes into knowledge that's in your head. So that is why you would do flashcards. If you really want to use just your notes to create content or to do something with it, I would adopt another workflow like the code framework to actually have the steps to go from notes that you took to content that you publish.
All right, I see. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, that's it. Everyone will get the recording. I will send the notes. Could be that it's after the weekend. Still have a little bit of a backlog, editing backlog I need to get to. Sign up for the Rome Stack newsletter if you want. If you like these sessions and you think this dude knows something about Rome, become a Rome Stack member. And if not, just sign up for the free newsletter. And yeah, I hope to see you more in these sessions, and keep those questions coming. Thank you. Bye, everyone.